My name is Tom Summers, and I'd like to welcome you to a new YouTube series titled The Other Side of the Tracks. In this series of videos, we will be focusing on African American life in Milford, Delaware during the mid-20th century. The state of Delaware is located on the eastern seaboard of the United States, and the town of Milford is located in the southern part of the state on the borders of Kent and Sussex County. While we will be presenting several people's remembrances of this time period, it is virtually impossible to cover all aspects of African American life in the area during this era. However, I hope the series will shine a light on a part of Milford history that has not received a large amount of attention. Our first guest is Dr. Reba Hollingsworth. Dr. Hollingsworth was born and raised in Milford. She attended the Milford Colored School 3C from grades 1 to 9. This school is better known in the community as the original Benjamin Banneker Elementary School, which was located close to where the current Banneker School now stands. Following that, her education continued in Dover at the Booker T. Washington School. Both of these schools were called colored schools because only African American students were allowed to attend these institutions. They were not allowed to attend the same schools as white children in Milford until the 1960s. Our thanks to Claudia Leister and the Milford Museum for allowing us to use their building as a place to speak to our guest. Dr. Hollingsworth, thanks for joining us today. We got a couple questions we want to go over, and one of the things I want to ask you first is, what's your actual first earliest memory of being in Milford, and what time period are we talking about?
My first memory of being in Milford to live was in 1932 when my parents moved to Milford in November, between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we had our first Christmas in Milford. And we lived up on North Street across from the colored school there. That's my very first memory of living in Milford. But my grandmother, my aunts and so forth lived here as well. So we would come back and forth to visit even before we moved here. So.
Okay, and you moved here from?
From Lincoln.
From Lincoln.
Lincoln, yeah.
For some of our viewers that may not know, can you tell us exactly where Lincoln is and how close it is to Milford?
Lincoln is only about 3 miles south, I guess southeast, depending on which route you take from Milford. So.
Okay, so it's fairly close.
It's within at that time it was in walking distance.
In walking distance.
Yeah, we walked back and forth out there to my grandfather's farm.
So your source of transportation then was basically your legs.
It was a Chevrolet.
Your Chevrolet, okay.
Yeah, you shove one foot and lay the other.
Oh, okay.
You never heard that one before, did you?
No, I have not.
Okay, all right.
So you would go and visit them on the farm. What was the farm like down there?
Well, my grandfather had an apple orchard, a peach orchard, and he had pear trees out there, in addition to the vegetables, the peas and lima beans, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes and white potatoes. He had a blackberry, we call it harbor, so you go out there and pick the blackberries. He also had the farm animals, the cows and the pigs and horses, and I didn't remember any tractors that he had, so I think that was a little bit before our time, but he certainly had the horses.
And where would an African-American family actually take the produce that they grew on a farm like that? Where would they take it to sell there?
They would take it downtown to the supermarkets because that was the only place that you could actually get your fresh produce, because the produce trucks did not come as they do now. They would go to the Acme Market, which was the A&P store at the time. I mean, the American store and the A&P store, which were the two supermarkets in town. They were down on Walnut Street, the main street.
Okay, so there were actually two supermarkets, main stores on Walnut Street here in Milford.
Right.
Okay.
Sometimes they would sell the produce. I just walking through the town, or just set up a little market in front of the farm or something like that.
So you would go through town sometimes and sell some of the produce? Is that what you're
my
saying?
sister and I would go out to my grandfather's and pick blackberries and blueberries, and we would sell them through the streets. 10 cents a quart for each.
Okay.
And it was quite interesting because I remember one situation where my sister and I were told to go to the back door when we were coming down South Walnut Street, and this woman wanted to buy some either blueberries or blackberries, I'm not sure which at the time. And my sister and I looked at each other, and we came off the porch and kept on walking down the street because we figured that she wanted our produce. We didn't have to. We were going to sell it anyway, so we really didn't have to go to the back door to get a dime for her. So,
okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, what was the local African American community like in terms of being? Was it a close knit community? Was everybody kind of minded their own business, or what was it
No,
like?
everybody was in everybody's business because
Oh,
everybody was either friends or family, and even the children. If you did something that was not quite right, somebody would say, "I'm going to talk to your parents about that," or sometimes they would even reprimand the kids themselves because it was just that close, and everybody was looking out for everybody else and making sure that you did what you were supposed to do. And of course, it was a small community. The Black community in Milford went from North Street over to Truett Avenue, uh, east and west. From north and south was basically Third Street. There were a few blacks on Third Street, all the way up to Sixth Street.
okay.
And at that time, the houses had not been built out on North Street out to the highway, but there was only one house out there, and that was the Graham's house. And they
Hmm.
used to rent the rooms for the teachers at Booker T.
Okay.
Booker T.
Oh,
That's because I went to Booker T school, but anyway, at Milford School, which eventually became a Benjamin Banneker after I left.
now you said it was a very close knit community. How important were houses of worship in this community, and how many were there
Yeah,
actually?
they're very important. Actually, there was the St. Paul Methodist Church on North Street across from the cemetery. There was Bethel AME Church, which was a church my family and I attended. As a matter of fact, my grandparents had helped to build that church. And then there was Mount Enon Baptist Church, which was diagonally across on 4th Street. Those were the three main churches. And sometimes they would have camp meetings in the summer, and so people would come in and, I don't know whether you've ever been to a camp meeting or not, but, everybody.
Could you tell us a little bit more about camp meetings? It's almost a tradition here on Delmarva.
Yeah. Well, they would have different preachers who would come in, and they would preach, and usually it was in the evening, and they'd set up church in a tent. And people would just go. It didn't matter the denomination, but that was just an outing.
Hmm.
I guess some people got happy. It was more fun for us as kids, but to watch what was going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Concerning things that we might take for granted today, where would African Americans go to actually buy groceries or things that they needed for the house on a daily basis? Where would they go to get those things?
Well, on a daily basis, if you just needed one or two items, you would go to the local grocery store. There's Mr. Drain was really the one who was on North Street at the time we were kids. And he would have whatever you needed, a pound of flour, butter, those kind of things. When you got ready to do your major shopping, my dad and mother would go downtown at the American store or the A&P, usually on Saturday nights because the stores were closed on Sundays, and they would go just before closing time and do their shopping because then they could get the produce, the vegetables and fruits that they would either have to throw out if they kept them over the weekend. So they could kind of get those for a little of nothing. So
Okay.
that's where we would do most of our shopping. And sometimes you would go down to Jewel's store, which was on the corner of Church and Walnut Street. No, that's not Walnut, Main Street going through.
Okay.
And then there was Cleaver's that was on 2nd Street. We would go there. As a matter of fact, my parents had what they call a store bill at Cleaver's. And if you needed one or two items that they didn't have at the Drain store, you'd go down there to get it. And I remember that when Bryant Bowles came to town, when the schools were integrated in the 50s, 1954, the Cleavers let Bryant Bowles and the National Association for the Advancement of White People use his truck to go through the streets with his bullhorn, talking about not integrating schools and all that. When my parents found out this had happened, then we all went down and paid the bill and closed it out. We never went back in the store anymore. So,
Was there any other ways that the stores themselves at that time, like the larger grocery stores, was there any segregation issues in the stores themselves?
not that we felt. I mean, they were looking for the money. So if you had enough money to buy whatever, we never had to wait, as my husband had to in North Carolina, for all the white people to leave the store before we could make our purchases. That was not an experience that we had here in Milford. So,
Okay.
but,
Tell us a little bit about, you said your husband was from further in the South, in North Carolina.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you guys talked for probably many times about the differences between your growing up in Milford and his in North Carolina. Can you share with us a few of those differences, possibly?
Well, his father died when he was 8 years old, which meant that his mother reared the 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls, and she only had a 3rd grade education, so she really didn't. Um, she didn't work, so the boys had to really work on the farms for the white people, or if they needed some work done, she would take them out of school and tell you have to go work for Mr. So-and-so today, which meant that the children got farther and farther behind. And as a matter of fact, there was, my husband didn't graduate from high school. He failed senior English and didn't graduate because his mother had taken him out, and he never did that senior paper. But he ended up with a PhD without a high school diploma. So
okay.
After we got married, so that was another story. But
Mhm.
but none of his brothers and sisters, except one that I can remember, actually finished high school. Some of them may have finished later on, I'm not sure, but I knew that one of them, Catherine, his oldest sister, finished high school. But they had to work, take care of things. I remember my husband saying that if he had to go down to the store, the local store, to get something, they wouldn't wait on him until all the white people had left the store.
In North Carolina,
In
it
North
was like
Carolina,
that,
yeah. But we did not have that kind of experience here in Milford. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned about education and how it was so spotty in terms of in the South, where they had to work for different people, sometimes be pulled out of school to go work for somebody. What did your parents do in terms of focusing on their kids' education, including yourself?
Yeah, but the difference, though, in North Carolina was that they had high schools and colleges for Black students. In Delaware, there was only one high school for Black kids. That was in Wilmington. And so most of the Black students in Kent and Sussex County and Lower Newcastle County completed only the education that was offered in their community. And Georgetown, Seaford, I think Laura were the only ones that offered 11th grade, and the rest of them 8th, 9th, or whatever the community offered. And students stopped school generally at that level. My parents, of course, valued education. My mother had gone to Delaware State College, and my dad had been up there for a month, and his dad made him come home. But anyway, they valued education. So when we came along, if we wanted to go, I graduated second in my class from a Milford school, and graduated second in my high school class. So I got a $50 scholarship to go to Delaware State College. So they encouraged us to get as much education as we could.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad would always tell us that the folks are as good as the people. And he said, you don't have to bend over to kiss anybody. You can't do it for yourself, so you don't do it for anybody else. And so he always told us, if you can't find a job, make a job, so you don't have to be beholden to anybody. So all of us, all 7 of us, actually had our own businesses of one time or another. So we didn't have to go looking for a job from anybody in order to make a living.
Okay.
So my sister was a beautician. I had a brother who was a barber beautician, because I went to college, and another brother, my nephew's father, played saxophone. He had a band, so he also got a job working in Philadelphia, which is where he lived. But basically, income was the band. My oldest brother was what we called a handyman. So we all had a way of making a living without begging, without going on welfare, and that kind of thing. So that was attributed to my dad's teachings.
Well, let me ask you this about going to college. What was your major, and what did you hope to do when you were younger?
I knew I had to get out of Milford because I was not going to pluck chickens and work in the factories all my life. And I had learned to sew, had taught myself to sew when I was a little kid. I wanted to be a doctor, but there was no money for that. So I went to Delaware State and majored in home economics with a minor in science. And I taught until the schools were segregated or integrated after the segregation. And I applied for a job at Dover High School as a home economics teacher, and they had already promised a job to a girl who was graduating from the University of Delaware. But evidently I made an impression on somebody because they offered me a job as a guidance counselor. I had never had a guidance counselor, had never had any courses in counseling, But that summer, I took 9 hours in counseling at the University of Delaware since I was working on a master's in counseling in the home economics. So I got certified with a limited certificate in counseling and took the job. And that's how I got into counseling.
And what time period was this?
Oh, this was in 1966.
66.
They were getting ready to close William C. Jason in 67.
Okay.
And there were limited positions in home economics throughout the entire state for blacks or whites. There were actually only 3 vacancies. And Dover was closest to home, paid most money, so that's why I applied there.
Okay.
So,
all right. Let's look a little bit more at life here in Milford growing up. Where would the African community go if you needed a doctor or a dentist or some type of medical care?
Well, Dr. Baker was the doctor here in town, and he would come to the house. Sometimes you could go to his office, but mostly he would come to the house. Most of the doctors would come to the house to visit, so you didn't go to the offices. If you had to go to the hospital, you went down to the Milford Memorial Hospital, which at that time was next to Jewel's store. And all the blacks were in the basement, on the first floor basement. But you tried to stay out of the hospital as much as you could because even to go to a dentist, I remember I was 14 or 15, I had a tooth that needed a filling. And instead of the dentist actually cleaning it out and deadening the nerve in it, he just filled it with the nerve in there. And the whole weekend when the Novocaine wore off, I had a toothache. So when I went back to him that Monday, asking him to take the filling out and redo it, he would just pull the whole tooth. I still have that tooth that's still in good shape except for that little filling in there. But that was the kind of attitude, like, if you take out the tooth, they don't have any problem with it. But I didn't like some of the attitude that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Even, I think, I just didn't like some of it. So we didn't cater to it like that. If you mistreated us, we didn't spend our money with you.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Now, where would you go if you wanted to buy a car here locally, or some kind of type of vehicle or a truck?
Well, I remember, you could, if you had the money, go to the car dealership. But my dad was kind of handy, so he would buy a junk car and rehab it. He bought an old Model T and made a saw rig out of it and sawed wood, and that's how he made his living. But I don't remember his buying a car. He never had a new car. He would just buy an old car, or somebody may have a car that they were selling or something like that, or a truck or whatever.
All right.
Yeah.
We've talked quite a bit about your educational experience, about where you actually attended, but what was it like actually attending school here in the area? What subjects did you cover? What type of education did you feel that you got?
Well, I know that when the teachers, of course, were all in the community, so they were like part of the family as well. So there was no such thing as messing up in school, because if you did, your parents heard about it almost before you got home. But they actually made sure that we had a solid education, to the point that I didn't have any languages because I was a home ec major all the way through, but I had the sciences, and every subject matter that we had at Milford School number 3C, which eventually became Benjamin Banneker, actually related to the contributions of blacks in that subject matter. So we actually had Black history throughout the whole curriculum. As a matter of fact, I even got to meet Carter G. Woodson because his niece was one of my second grade teachers. And he came to visit and came to the school, and I actually got to meet him, who was the founder of Black History Week and now Black History Month. But we had, as a matter of fact, when we went to Delaware State College for high school, I remember the president saying that the students from Millsboro and Milford were the best prepared students from any of the schools in the state. So at least we were able to compete, and so we did. I mean, we had the academic subjects, the chemistry and physics and biology and geometry. And I didn't have as much math as I would like, but algebra, because I was a home ec science major and I had all these lab courses, so I couldn't take the languages and some of the other things that I wanted, but they were available for those students who could. So,
how new were the books and the other classroom materials that you had to use?
At Benjamin Banneker, at Milford School, they were always used books. The schools, all the books that we had came from the white schools. So my sister and I, when we were younger, would help the teachers in the summer clean up all these old books, erase them and tape them back up and use those for our classes. I never had a new book until I went to Delaware State and bought my own. They were always hand-me-downs from the white schools. I remember the principal, Mr. Waters, saying that he had actually ordered some books for our classes, and they never came. And of course, they were in the Milford School District, so he called the superintendent to ask if they had received them. And they said, "Oh, no." And a few weeks later, we got a box of used books from Milford White School. Never did get the new books that my principal had ordered because they stayed in the white school. It was, like we didn't deserve anything better. The only good thing about it was that, for us anyway, we lived always close enough to the school that we could go home for lunch. School started at 9 o'clock in the morning and went to 4. And at 12 o'clock, we could go home since we had an hour for lunch. But it was a community type school, and they did everything they could to prepare us for life and to compete. Even to the point that when I went to the University of Delaware to work on my master's in home economics, they had told us that Delaware State was not a good college, but I was competing with students who had gone to Cornell and NYU and all that, making A's. As a matter of fact, one situation that happened there was that when I went there in 52, they had just opened to blacks in 50, and they really didn't want us out there in 52. And I wanted to keep my certificate active, even though I didn't have a job teaching. And I took a class, actually 2 classes, and we had teachers there. They wouldn't speak to us and all that. There were 2 of us blacks in the class. And I got an A in both classes. And later on, one of the women who was also a student in that class became an employee of the University of Delaware and became my advisor while I was working on my master's. Of course, I had access to my records. And when she found out that I had gotten A's in the class, she said she got B's, and she told me that no matter what I did, I would never get anything more than a B at the University of Delaware under her. I mean, that was that kind of stuff, and there was nothing I could really do about it, even though I complained to the dean and all that. But we were told we all looked alike. They couldn't tell the difference in us.
Well, were all your teachers growing up at the Milford schools and then at the high school at Del State, were they all African Americans?
All African American. I never had any white teachers until I went to the University of Delaware.
Okay.
They were all African American teachers who valued in education. They all had good education themselves, even though they had gone to black colleges themselves, but they were not stupid, as some people thought they were.
Did you get the idea that maybe they were building the next generation to take the next step maybe in society? Or
that was not something we were thinking about at that time. We were thinking about trying to get through the school and get to the next level. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Were there places in town here that you were told to avoid or you didn't feel comfortable going to because you're African American?
No, not in Milford. The only thing was that when we went to the theater, we had to sit in the balcony, but we didn't mind that because they were the best seats in the theater.
Now you're talking the Shines Theater, the large theater in town.
Right
okay.
There. It was the only one in Milford. But for 10 cents, that's what the fare was.
And what time period was this when you went?
This was I came to Milford in 1932. And I didn't leave until I was 14. I went to Rehoboth when I was 14 in 1940. And after that, I was in and out of Milford the whole time. So it was that time period. But we went everywhere because even the whites knew most of us. If they didn't know us individually, they knew who we were, and our families were all kind of intermingled together. So
okay. What types of employment did your mom and dad have while they were in town here?
My mother didn't work outside the home except occasionally. She worked for the superintendent of schools, Mr. Schilling, and did days work for him. But not all the time. She stayed home and reared us until the youngest child was in school. But after that, then she'd work in the factory in the summertime. But to have a regular job full time, she didn't have that until after Eugene, the youngest, was ready to go to school. And then she worked at the Milford Hospital Laundry. And that's where she retired from.
Was it considered that there were only certain jobs that were available for African Americans during that time period? I know talking to my own mother that she had like 2 choices coming out of college. She could either teach or she could be a secretary.
Right.
And you had no other place to go if you were female.
Well, in Milford before then, you could either work and do domestic work or you work in the factories or you could do nothing, or make your own living, whichever way. I used to sew for people even before I graduated. And, got a few dollars doing that. But you made a way to make your own living. And as I said, my dad had a wood yard, and so he sold wood. In the summer, he'd go to the beach and get fish from when the ships came in with the fish, and he would sell those through the streets. And whatever was left over, we had to clean those and salt them in a wooden keg for the winter.
Mm-hmm.
He always had hogs and so forth. So we never were without food. You may have to wear your shoes until everybody got theirs, but that kind of thing. But I picked berries and bought my first pair of shoes when I was 8 years old. So
You bring up an interesting point. Where did you go to buy clothes, or did you make them all?
no, I didn't make them all, but J.C. Penney's, with Grant's, Cooper Smith's are where you bought your clothes. Cooper Smith's, of course, had their own factory there at the store.
Okay.
They were the most expensive, but most of the times you got them at Penney's or Grant's.
Okay.
Those are two stores. There was another hardware store down the street, right on the river, and I've forgotten the name of it. But anyway, whatever you needed, you would go to the store where they had it. And, nobody would say anything except in Milford. But when I went to Dover, I liked hats, and they had the Stidham's hat store in Dover, right there on State Street. And when I went in to look at the hat that I had seen that I wanted, she gave me a little black skull cap. And I said, "What's this for?" And she said, "Well, you have to put that on." I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, black." At that time, we were Negroes. But anyway, you have to put that on because you have oil in your hair. And if you've got a hat that's oily, I can't sell them. So I asked if everybody who tried on a hat had to put that skull cap on. And of course, it was just the blacks. I said, "Well, I'm not going to wear this hat with a skull cap on it, so I'm not going to try it on with and I'm not going to buy it." I just thought, I was prejudiced. You don't have to worry about me buying a hat from you, and I have to do that. I just thought it was insulting.
Mm-hmm.
So I told her, and I just didn't buy the hat. So,
Okay.
But other than that, you can try on shoes, clothes in the stores, and nobody seemed to buy it. Although, as I said, I did start making my own clothes. Really, there was a fire downtown and burned Penny's, Grant's, and Cooper Smith. And all the fabric and stuff that these stores sold eventually was put out into the street. So I just got a whole lot of it, my sister and I, and bolts of fabric, and took the home, washed it out, and made clothes for everybody in the neighborhood.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, what did you, as a young African American in Milford, what did you do for entertainment when you were like a teenager, or younger than that even?
Well, as a teenager, the school always had activities on the weekends for us. The Elks Home sometimes would have dances. And then when the Moonlight Grill finally came along and they built the dance hall in the back, they'd have the major bands would come for that. And we would go there. But mostly you visited your family and you made your own entertainment, right there. And you'd go to the movies, of course, for 10 cents and come back home. My brother and I would make up the dance routines and do that. But that's what you did. And as I said, I went away from home at 14, so I didn't have from 6 to 14 many years to be a kid in Milford. And I never, really stayed home but one full year after I was 14. So
what did you do maybe for physical activity? Things like, skip rope or anything like that?
Oh, yeah, we did skip rope. And my brother and I got a pair of roller skates when we were, I guess, about 12. And there was snow, and so we went up in the attic and learned how to skate in the attic, so that when we came back after the snow left, we could go out in the street and skate. But we used to skip ropes, skate, play jacks, play cards sometimes. My dad had a Victrola, so he taught us all to dance, so we would dance. Kids, everybody in our house, everybody in the street would come to our house to dance.
What kind of dances did you learn?
My dad taught us the waltz, two-step, black bottom, Charleston, all the major dances at the time. So.
Oh, okay.
Jitterbug, I was considered a pretty good dancer then and now.
Oh, okay. All right. Now, how was the area actually in which you lived considered the center of activity for the African American community?
We lived right in the center of it because we lived right across the street from the Moonlight Grill, and all the band fellows would come to our house when they were not playing. As a matter of fact, my sister married one of them, so they actually had what they call an in-house band. Eventually. But everybody was there. My dad had a truck most of the time, and he would put straw on the back of the truck and take the kids to Harrington Fair or to the beach and things like that. So everybody And sometimes the children would come by our house on their way to school and stop for breakfast and come and stay for dinner afterwards, that kind of thing. So our house was actually, we call it the center of attraction in Milford. So,
Okay.
yeah. And my dad and mother did not turn kids away. I mean, anybody who came, even some of the adults would come to our house at dinner time. And won't you have some dinner? Oh, no, but I'll just have a little bit of that. And when they finished, they'd had a whole meal. But, it was...
Now, if you had the opportunity to get out of town and go somewhere, you mentioned something about maybe going to Rehoboth for a while.
And Rosedale Beach.
Rosedale Beach.
Yeah, that's where a lot of the activity in the summer was, at the Rosedale Beach. And then you would sometimes get on the bus and ride to Wilmington and go shopping to Wilmington Dry Goods.
Okay.
That time was Wilmington Dry Goods. It wasn't... But anyway, you just get out and go see whatever, wherever your money would take you, or you could get out and walk or drive.
Did you see any famous acts at Rosedale Beach?
Oh, yeah. I mean, all the major bands, Jimmy Lunsford, Cab Calloway, all those fellows would play down there. I didn't see Lena Horne until I was grown. I didn't see...
Did she play down there?
I don't remember her playing down at Rosedale, but I did get to see her. As a matter of fact, she was in our sorority, so yeah, so I got to see her. You just, whoever was, then you got to see them. Duke Ellington.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So.
Dr. Hollingsworth, is there anything else?
Tell you about,
I was going to ask you, is there anything else you want us to share?
Yeah, at Rosedale Beach, when the major bands would come, the whites were still segregating themselves, so they would not come into the dance because it was a black dance and black band and everything. But they would put the boats out in the river because it's right there on the river, right? And they would sometimes put their chairs around the shoreline to listen to the bands, kind of thing. And then even for Milford had a baseball team, Milford Yanks, and when they were playing a home game, then you could actually use the ballpark, and the blacks could sit out in the stadium. But when the white teams played, then the blacks sat in the reserve seats, reserve blacks. So whichever team, then that's where you sat.
And that was understood and accepted for that time period.
Accepted for that time period. So if there was a black team playing, the whites would sit in the segregated area, and vice versa. So, yeah. So.
Dr. Hollingsworth, is there anything else you want to share with us before we conclude our interview?
Well, I think I told you about the hat incident and trying on a hat and attending school and getting married. I got married in Milford.
You did get married in Milford here?
Yeah.
At the AME church?
At the AME church. Yeah, December 28th. As a matter of fact, the anniversary is coming up. If my husband were still living, we'd be married 72 years this year.
Wow. Now, what year was it you got married?
We got married in 1947 when I was a junior in college.
Okay.
December 28th. Yeah. And we lived, in Delaware all our married life. In Wilmington and Dover. I stayed in Milford with my mother when I first started teaching at Jason, and the next year with my sister while we were getting a house built in Dover. But other than that.
Did your parents remain in Milford after everyone had left?
Everyone, yeah. Dad built a house on Truett Avenue that's still standing. Still standing? Yeah. He rented before, and then he would help tear down houses and save the lumber that was usable and use that to build his house with. And he had one brother who was an electrician who wired the house, another who was a plumber, so the three of them built the house.
So it's kind of a family affair with everybody helping out.
Yeah.
That's great.
So the house is still standing there on the corner of 5th Street and Truett Avenue.
Okay.
Yeah, so... And there are still 3 of us living of the 7 kids. I'm the oldest, of course.
You're the oldest, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
well, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time, and it's great that you're able to provide all this information about Milford. And
there's still more that I have to think of.
There's plenty more. Maybe we can have a part 2.
Right,
but thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you asking me to do it.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.